Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to every single one of you for coming. This is really overwhelming. I thought maybe half of this number of people might show up, but thank you so much. Your support means everything. Writing is a largely solitary endeavor, but getting a book from the initial germ of an idea to a published product, and especially to an event like this, requires many more people than just the author. I have had the help and support of friends and family and well-wishers and readers and editors along the way, to whom I owe a lot of gratitude. In the interest of not turning this into an Academy Award speech, I want to thank all of them from this podium, but I really do want to acknowledge Dr. George Walreich, Director and CEO of the College of Physicians, and Jay Bazell, who's the Director of Communications over here, for giving us this wonderful space and for their very generous support. Without them, we would not be having this event. So thank you again. I echo Christine's thoughts about them. I also want to acknowledge the amazing work done by Lanternfish Press. With the amount of flux in the publishing world, you may have glimpsed some of it if you've been following Stephen Colbert and his public spat with Amazon. There is actually a space that is opened up for independent presses to step in and publish work that doesn't fall within the standard genre boundaries of publishing. And Lanternfish Press is really committed to publishing great writing and literature. And on their website, they say, and I quote, "We agree with William Faulkner that the literary enterprise is about the old verities and truths of the heart, the old universal truths, lacking which any story is ephemeral and doomed, love and honor, and pity and pride, and compassion and sacrifice." And you can visit their website to learn more, but I think this quick quote should give you a sense of the real mission that Lanternfish Press has. Christine Newley, you just heard from, is actually an incredible author in her own right. And her editing has had a very important role in shaping the book. Very often as readers, we do not realize how much of the final linguistic texture of any writing owes itself to a very skilled editor. And pretty much every page of this book has Christine's fingerprints and sharp editorial eye on it. I can say that with authority because I've gone through it, all of the drafts with her in back and forth emails over months. And Amanda Thomas, who should be somewhere here as well, there she is a very talented illustrator, and she really has a skill for encapsulating ideas and images. And her sketches are in this book. And they really managed to capture so many of the concepts that I've tried to put into words. Together with their team, they've really brought the Afflictions to life and have hosted this beautiful launch. And I can say that I'm very proud to be published by Lanternfish Press. So I think they really deserve a round of applause. So that brings me to the book itself. So I can't start at a better place than this very stunning cover. This is a mid-19th century painting by an Italian artist named Filippo Balbi. Somewhat obscure, you may not have heard of it. The painting is called Testa Anatomica, or Anatomical Head. And for those of you who have had a chance to look at this closely, you can see that it's made up of human figures who are twisted and fitted together to form a composite head. Christine found this image in an online archive a couple of months ago, and the moment she showed it to me, I could see that she had hit upon something very special. Actually more than special, perfect, because even if we had commissioned an artist to create an image specifically for this book, we could not have found an image that was more perfect than this one. It's actually an image that encapsulates one of the core themes of the book, and that is the tension between fragmentation and unity. Structurally, The Afflictions isn't exactly a novel or a novella, in the sense that those forms tend to have a cast of characters to whom things happen in the course of a plot. At the same time, it isn't exactly a collection of short stories either. It's somewhat of a hybrid between the two. The central idea is that somewhere in Renaissance Europe, there is an enormous library known as the Central Library. The book does not specify a place or time, but if you'd like to mentally situate yourself, you can imagine Portugal in the early 16th century. And at the core of this library is a grand hall which has 327 volumes of this imagined medical encyclopedia. And this is the complete compendium of all medical knowledge available in this fictional world, and it's the only book of its kind. An elderly librarian named Senor Jose is showing a young apprentice through the library. The apprentice's name is Maximo, and he takes him into the chamber where the encyclopedia is housed. And through the course of a single day, they converse as they skim through different volumes of the encyclopedia, and Senor Jose gives Maximo a glimpse of the range and breadth of the afflictions in the encyclopedia. Now, you never hear Maximo's voice because Maximo is you. You are the young apprentice who is being led through this library. And the older librarian speaks to him of his life, of his impending mortality, of his experiences in the library, and his hopes and fears for the future of this library. And however, their conversations form a very small part of the book. The majority of the book is actually made up of the afflictions themselves, the ones that they skim through. Now, as Christine mentioned, these are not real medical disorders, they're invented ones. And there are patterns and ideas that run through these diseases, and they recur throughout the book. And in that sense, actually, the structure of the book is really captured by this cover image. And perhaps the best way I can describe the afflictions is as 50 miniature fables about mankind, and each one packaged and disguised as a clinical vignette, and hopefully fitting into some kind of larger vision about the human creature. So now this is all very abstract, and so to give you a sense of its contents, I can read some of the afflictions. So the first one I'm going to read is Amnesia inversa, which is the one that Christine mentioned. Amnesia, of course, means loss of memory, and inversa means inverted. I actually have a very good memory for faces, but I have a terrible memory for names. And one of my social phobias, which actually happens a lot, is that I will run into people with whom I've interacted extensively and whose name I absolutely should know, but which I cannot come up with at that moment. It hasn't yet happened tonight, but watch out. Well, in fact, when the tables are turned and when someone else doesn't remember who I am, I actually feel a great sense of relief, gratitude almost, having met a kindred spirit. And but if you think about it, the reason why forgetting someone's identity seems like such a breach of the social contract is because at the end of the day, the only thing you can give to another person is the feeling that their existence matters, and that if they were to cease to exist or disappear or vanish, you would notice their absence. And it's based on this idea that amnesia inversa is based. Amnesia inversa. The invalid with amnesia inversa explains away the first memory lapses because they involve distant acquaintances, barbers and peddlers, innkeepers and tobacconists. But then the episodes become more frequent. Gatekeepers who once greeted the invalid by name now ask pointed questions about his purpose. Vendors from whom he purchased flour and salt each week claim they have never seen his face before. His neighbors' eyes no longer flicker with recognition at the sight of him, and his friends answer their doors with the polite, suspicious smiles one reserves for strangers. The sufferer tries amulets and tinctures, prayers and supplications, but the disease progresses, swallowing all those dear to him, until finally he awakens on the rumpled sheets of a baffled and affronted lover and realizes that he has been wiped from all human memory. Scattered across the shelves of the Central Library are reports written by physicians who, grasping the nature of the condition, transcribed the words of the invalids while they spoke and dispatched their manuscripts with all possible haste before their own memories could fade. These physicians, when questioned about these reports, identified the handwriting as their own, but had no memory of ever having written them. Perhaps that is evidence enough for the existence of this disease. The fate of invalids with amnesia inversa remains unknown, for the very nature of the malady prevents them from being studied. There are at least three possibilities. Perhaps the invalids live at home in anonymity, strangers even to neighbors who see them every day of their lives. Or they take their own lives in despair, hoping that death will end the amnesia and allow their friends to mourn them. Or else they transform themselves into wanderers, filling their days with fleeting infatuations and camaraderies in towns that they leave under cover of night, ridding themselves of the need to be remembered. So that was Amnesia inversa. The second affliction is called Immortalitas diabolica. Immortalitas means immortality, and diabolica means diabolical. To give you a bit of background on one of the ideas in this affliction, in the current post-Enlightenment era, one can no longer in good faith invoke religious ideas in scientific and medical debates. But in medieval times and even early Renaissance times, European thinkers and philosophers really had to grapple with ideas of God, the devil, and the soul anytime they advanced an explanation about the universe or anything in it and human beings. And they had to, at some level, take doctrinal views into account. Because of the setting of this book and the time when it is set, I decided to make full use of this possibility, and actually many of the afflictions have a lot of theological discussions and debates. This particular one actually makes very light use of it. There are others that are much more involved. But it does make very quick reference to the soul and its possible relationship to the body. And it attempts to ask the question, how much do you value your health and how far would you go to preserve it? Immortalitas diabolica is poorly documented, for no one will admit to suffering from it. The authorities become suspicious, however, when villagers speak of an inhabitant with obscene youthfulness, free of the diseases and deformities that have visited everyone else his age. Immortalitas diabolica grants its victims the ability to will away every pain and infirmity that befalls them. The ability first surfaces in childhood, when the instantaneous cure of scrapes and fevers seems as natural to them as speaking. As they grow, they see those around them suffer through illnesses that they themselves can dispel with a fleeting thought. They acquire a reputation for remarkable health, but it is not until the 4th and 5th decades of their lives that people around them question their pristine skin, their robust teeth, their luminous hair. It is usually then that the invalid learns the terrible truth about his own health. Immortalitas diabolica does not cure afflictions, it transfers them to the bodies of others. When a person with this power reaches within himself to expunge his illness, its vapors leave his body and settle on some innocent passerby who must now suffer an illness fate has not ordained for him. As the person with immortalitas diabolica ages, the legacy of the gift weighs heavier upon him. And while he can effortlessly banish diseases that threaten his body, he cannot banish the memories of those whose lives he has blighted. Some people with immortalitas diabolica try to reject the gift, allowing wrinkles to line their faces, scars to riddle their lungs, cancers to flourish in their guts. But when the terminal moments of agony and suffocation arrives, Lucifer rages in their minds. Intoxicated with pain, they stagger then into dingy alleys, to the huts of the poor and the destitute who are unlikely to be missed, and they allow themselves to drink from the monstrous elixir that swirls within. When the deed is done, their young muscular legs whisk them away as cries emerge from the windows beside which they stood. Nevertheless, those cursed with immortalitas diabolica are not truly immortal. After extraordinarily long lives, they die of causes unknown. Necropsy reveals youthful, supple tissues, a body that appears to have expired at the peak of health. Spasms of the heart, poisons in the blood, or other fatal chances too sudden to be wished away may lie behind these deaths. But some authorities suggest that the mechanism is not so simple. They posit that sickness and suffering are integral to the human soul. So a person with immortalitas diabolica must forsake fragments of the soul each time he expunges an illness. It is then only a matter of time before the soul is ground to dust, and all that is left is a body in pristine repair, devoid of any vital force to sustain it. Immortalitas, diabolica. The next one is Auditio, cruciabilis. Auditio comes from the same root as audio, or audition, which is hearing. Cruciabilis comes from the Latin root crucio, which is torture. So it means torturous or agonizing or painful, and you'll see why. Towns infected by Auditio cruciabilis are blanketed in silence. The only sound in their streets is that of the wind. The houses appear abandoned, haunted, until one notices the inhabitants tiptoeing in the shadows with scarves wrapped around their ears. Auditio cruciabilis perverts the hearing of its victims and converts all sounds to stabs of pain. At the first touch of contagion, the town fills with screams. In taverns and granaries, in markets and guild halls, people cup their ears in agony. The cries die down when they realize that only silence can stop their misery. A terrible new world unfolds before them, one in which utensils must not be clattered, dough not be pounded, nails not be hammered. A world that admires even the act of walking in agony, for any twig might be a source of torture. Song and gossip, laughter and quarrels cease. Even the animals, who are not immune to the torments of Auditio cruciabilis, stop their howling and grunting. Perhaps the contagion makes their lives safer. The act of slaughter, rarely possible in silence, becomes anathema. Such towns fall into ruin and can easily starve. Neighboring villages, recognizing the torments of the disease, leave baskets of food at their outskirts. The invalids usually return the baskets with grateful gifts, coins, jewels, heirlooms. Sometimes they return them with swaddled infants, infants who wouldn't stop crying. Few reports exist of the inner workings of these towns. Some scholars claim to have crept across their borders in secret. They write with wonder of the elaborate ballet of the people, the slow viscous movements they conduct with wary grace, the extraordinary steps they take to preserve the silence. Toxins that deafen the ears cost more than gold. Those who cannot pay drink wax on their eardrums. But these towns are fated to die out. They shun the act of procreation, fraught as it is with sounds of pleasure and pain. As the victims succumb to the poisons of age, the silence that envelops the town becomes one of desolation. And for the last one, I'm going to read Morbus geographicus. Morbus simply means illness, and geographicus means geographic. I moved to the US from India in 2005, and I was very excited about the move, about beginning a new residency program at Temple University, about the new life I would have in the United States. And then 3 days before my flight, the crushing weight of everything just fell on me. And I realized truly what I was doing. I was leaving the city where I was born, where I had spent 24 years of my life. I was leaving my parents, my sister. I was uprooting myself. And it was in this state that I went to a local mall to buy something. And I remember walking like a zombie with this knot in my chest that simply would not go away between these shops. And a most divine smell wafted towards me. So one of those shops was a bakery, and they had freshly baked cookies. And in that moment, I realized what Oprah means when she says emotional eating. Something I had never realized before. Because the only thing in that moment that would deliver me were those cookies and nothing else. To cut a long story short, I ate 7. But this is somewhat of a digression, because this story has nothing to do with cookies or the smell of food, or definitely not Oprah. But it has something to do with a sense of belonging and rootedness, and of the place that we think of as home. So for the last affliction, here is Morbus geographicus. The victim of Morbus geographicus complains of a cluster of unrelated symptoms: edema of the limbs, spasms of the gut, inflammations of the lungs. His physicians, perplexed, refer him to experts in other towns. The symptoms wax and wane as the invalid makes his travels. Few practitioners know about this disorder, and years may pass without a diagnosis. At last, a rare physician who is trained in both cartography and medicine takes the time to comb through the documentation of his peers and find correlations between each symptom and the town in which it was recorded. He refers to maps and charts, compasses and scales, and after careful triangulation, prescribes the land that will bring relief to the sufferer. Morbus geographicus allots its victims a radius on earth within which they may thrive. Any travel beyond its boundaries makes the symptoms recur. The locations are unpredictable. A farmer may be banished to a barren and salty plain, a man of letters to an illiterate village, a councilman to a mountain where he can only preside over wild goats. It is there, however, that the invalid must rebuild his life, fenced in by his disease. But the initial migration does not cure Morbus geographicus. New pains arise with time, and the invalid must travel to neighboring towns and record the precise intensity of each symptom at each location. He must send these details to the cartographer physician, who uses them to calculate that the allotted region, for reasons unknown, has shifted. The invalid, in order to soothe his new ills, must detach himself from the land in which he had begun to take root and migrate as Morbus geographicus commands. He must cross oceans and continents, pass through lands whose languages he does not speak and whose customs he does not understand, and at last accept the melancholy task of settling into a new house, pretending that its walls will protect him from the world, when in reality the germ of disease within him turns every wall on earth to paper. The invalid becomes a palimpsest, his life etched with layer on layer of new scenery, until he wonders if there is anything beneath it all. And then, one day, the trajectory falls in on itself and leads him back to the land of his birth, announcing the end of both his travels and his existence. Thank you to all of you.